So chapter 3, we are going to be talking about values and the importance that values has in the structure of a culture and the influences on culture as well. This is one of my favorite things, is to understand personal and professional values and then marry those into cultural values. So values are the social principles, goals, or standards accepted by persons in a culture. So let's start by talking a little bit about American values. Try to move this out of the way. Okay, so American values, here is one list that I found. And we believe in the right to privacy. We are very direct. We believe in equality, in informality and competition, time and efficiency, a high work ethic, and consumerism. Okay. Here is another. Independence. Where did that come from? Okay. Then this is a list by Wayne Baker. I don't remember who he was, but a list that I came across. And there's a lot of overlap, but I believe it will give you a different, because it has more descriptions. So respect for others. We accept and appreciate people of different racial, ethnic, and religious groups. These days, you're going to doubt this, but this is a value that we at least give lip service to, right? Symbolic patriotism. So we have an emotional connection to country. We just celebrated 4th of July and the flags are everywhere, and red, white, and blue everywhere, right? So feelings of good when seeing the American flag or hearing the national anthem. We believe in freedom, the right to participate in politics and elections, to express unpopular ideas without fearing for safety, the right to express our political party views and to argue those views. We believe in keeping our nation secure and safe from external threats and internal threats. We believe in self-reliance and individualism. So reliance on self, independence, individual accomplishment. We believe in equal opportunity, so equal access to jobs and education and voting, regardless of age, gender, race, or other factors. We believe in a level playing field. We believe in getting ahead. So we believe that if you work hard, you should be able to advance and succeed. We believe in the pursuit of happiness. So enjoyment, leisure, and pleasure. We believe in justice and fairness. So all the world's people should live in harmony, justice and fairness for all. And we believe in critical patriotism. So tough love of a country, criticism of America stems from love of country and desire for improvement. So when we talk against our political parties and this and that, it's because we want to improve. I may be exaggerating a little bit, or maybe not enough. Depends on your views, right? But these two lists give you a pretty broad and solid view of what America values. Okay. Well, look at this. The top 10 priorities of cultural values across 3 different regions or countries. So US, freedom, independence, self-reliance, equality, individualism, competition, efficiency, time, directness, openness. Japan, belonging, group harmony, collectiveness, age and seniority, group consensus. Remember, group harmony and group consensus, interesting. Cooperation, quality, patience, indirectness, and go-between. Okay? Can you start seeing the contrasts and where we need cultural awareness to be able to negotiate? Arab countries, family security and harmony, parental guidance, age, authority, compromise, devotion, patience, indirectness, and hospitality. So if you start to compare these, you start to get a sense as to the similarities and differences. When you're writing your research paper, I would suggest this would be a good comparison. Your home culture versus the culture you're studying. What are the top 5? What are the top 10 cultural values? And how does that play out in business that you need to be aware of? These are the cultural leadership theories. There are 6 of them, and ranked from higher to lower countries, higher, middle, lower. Okay. So we have charismatic, value-based, Anglo, Latin American, Southern Asian, Germanic, Europe, and Nordic Europe, and then on the lower scale, Middle East. Team orientation, Latin America, very team oriented. Middle East, not so much team oriented. Participative. You have on the higher spectrum, Germanic Europe, Nordic Europe, and Anglo. On the lower spectrum, Eastern Europe, Southern Asia, Confucian Asia, Middle East. Humane oriented. On the high end, you've got Southern Asia, Sub-Sahara Arabs and Anglo. On the lower end, Latin Europe and Nordic Europe. Okay. Autonomous. You have, I thought was interesting, a huge list of higher and not very many on the lower scale. I think you're either believe in autonomy or you don't. So you're either on that list or you're not. And then self-protective, you have Southern Asia, Middle East, Confucian Asia, Eastern Asia, you see Asia and Middle East there. And then on the lower end, you have Anglo-Germanic Europe, Nordic Europe. So you can read more about what each of these mean in the book and some explanation of each. But again, cultural leadership theories, these are how corporations lead. And if you can understand and explain, especially if there's big contrast in those between the 2 countries you're studying, this can give you a framework. Remember, I talk about you're going to build your paper around a framework. You could use this, cultural leadership theories, as the basis for your cultural comparison. Later on, we're going to talk about Hofstede. We're going to talk about some other models as well that you could use. But this gives you one of them. Then we have semantic differences. So the meaning of words and how we communicate that meaning verbally and non-verbally and the problems it can create. So we have a history of problems with brand names, and we've had near wars break out because of semantics, because of not understanding each other's languages. So negotiation, okay, so brand names. I talk a lot about Enactus, right? So Enactus is a word that was made up and it was studied in 120 languages to ensure that it was a word that was not going to be problematic. So the original company was named SIFE, Students in Free Enterprise. And as this student organization across universities around the world started to expand, we ran into some problems. For example, if you went to some African countries and former communist countries, and you said free enterprise, people interpreted that as they were going to get a free business. Someone was going to give them a business. Okay, so that was problematic. Then we had in 2 countries where Enactus expanded to, or back then SIFE, it was understood as a cuss word. Not really like a 4-letter bad word, but a derogatory. So in one country, SIFE is what you say when you're disgusted at someone and you just want to go, ugh, and you go, spit, and you say SIFE, okay? So problematic, right? And so that's how this organization goes on a search and creates the word Enactus. And in the US, we say N, entrepreneur, act, okay, action, and us together. So taking entrepreneurial action as a group, okay, for the betterment of humanity is what the organization signifies. Okay, so attribution and perception. So attribution is the ability to look at social behavior from another culture's view. Perception is the learned meaning of sensory images. So attribution training is training to help us see cultures from another's perspective. And I have to go back to Africa for this example. I was trying to think of examples. Let me give you an American example. So I moved to the US when I was 15, and I came from a very high context, high touch, warm family culture in Brazil, okay? And here in the US, people are more stoic, a little bit more distant. We're warm and friendly, but we're warm and friendly in certain ways in the US. So I talk with my hands, still do. If I sit on my hands, I have a hard time talking. And I went to a boarding high school, and I touched people. When I talk to people, I touch their arm, I touch their shoulder. If it's a woman, I would hold her hand or play with her hair. Can you see how this could be problematic? So I had guys telling me, you know, we're not interested in you, or hey, you like me, you know, and I was like, no, I'm just talking to you. So I had these cultural misunderstandings. I remember telling one guy one time, junior year in high school, I'm like, no, I don't like you, love you, you're a nice guy. I was just talking to you. And I said, how do I know you're not a figment of my imagination if I haven't touched you to know you're real? He thought I was insane. But anyway, this understanding from another cultural perspective, right, is a challenge. So when we moved to Africa, it was the first time in my life that I lived in a compound, but the compound was only our house. So basically a house, a yard, and 6 feet walls around the house with spikes on top to protect us. Okay? And so when I looked out any window, I saw a dirty white wall. And no matter how often you paint, it's going to be a dirty white wall. Okay? Because of mold and humidity and rain and whatever. And so I didn't speak any of the local languages, and I would hear sounds, and I had no frame of reference as to how to interpret it. And one of the people groups, the Susu, they're rather loud people. They're very voracious, they're very expressive, and they're very loud. Okay. I'd been there 6 years one time, and I got angry at a vendor one time, and I laid into him and raised my voice and attracted a crowd. And the hilarious thing is I gained the respect of the entire community because I stood up to someone who everybody knew was taking advantage of people. Anyway, when I first got there and I didn't know the sounds, this attribution and perception, every time I heard loud talking, it sounded angry to me. And I thought there were fights going on outside my walls all the time. And I had to acclimate myself. One of the things I did was every afternoon when it started cooling off, I would take chairs outside of our walls and sit out on the street with my kids and let them play outside a little bit, run around, so that I could see the sounds, hear the sounds, see the interaction, and understand that those sounds did not mean anger. Those sounds actually meant joy. So anyway, and then slowly as I started learning a word here and there, I got to the point, I never became fluent. It was a frustration of mine, but I was indoors raising children, little kids, too much, and not out enough. But I got to the point where I could sit in a conversation and I could tell you what they were talking about. Like I could tell you they're talking about politics, they're talking about food, or they're talking about their family, they're talking of, and certain topics, I got to the point where I understood and could participate. If it came to politics, I knew they were talking about politics. I caught the words, but I couldn't tell you what they were for or against, But the more I learned cultural expression and language together, the more I was able to interpret actions based on attribution and perception is the point. So here's a series of attitudes. So we have attitudes towards a number of things that affect how we go about doing business in other countries. And it poses challenges. So we have cultural differences around the world based on attitudes towards women's equality, the roles and responsibilities that women play at home and at work, work environment, home environment. Okay. And back to that perception, we bring our perceptions of right and wrong into another culture. And some of the biggest challenges that I have faced in my life have been to learn when I lived in a Muslim West African culture to accept, to understand, and not judge another's culture. Whether it was attitude towards women, whether it was attitude towards money, or lying, versus, like, we were in a situation where someone lied to protect the honor of the family, and everybody knew they were lying, but it wasn't acceptable to embarrass the family. You know, polygamy, understanding why countries have polygamy, and I guess in a sense accepting that it's right in certain situations, in certain cultures. That was one of the hardest ones for me to accept, and to accept that something may be right for me and not right for someone else. Was very, very difficult, and I must say there are things that I still struggle with today. I can't tell you, right, this is right and this is wrong, and we'll get back to that. Okay, attitude towards work. How many hours a week do you work? Let me look at that table really quick. Singapore, an average of 46.3 hours. India, an average of 46.9 hours per week. Canada, an average of 30.4. United States is an average of 42.3. So, what is our attitude towards work and how much we invest in it? There are attitudes towards entry-level jobs and pay. So there are cultures where you are going to be a volunteer apprentice. Volunteers, and you do not get paid for years until a paying job shows up. Okay. And in our context, that would be absolutely unforgiving. Personally, I have an attitude that no one should ever have to do a free internship. I think that if you work, you get paid. And interestingly enough, my son ended up doing a free internship last year because he couldn't find a paid one. And I found that very upsetting and very insulting that people would take advantage of someone like that. And yet there are cultures where that is the expectation, and that is how you get a job. It's not, you don't go and interview for a job. You volunteer and you learn the job first. Attitudes towards lunch. Here in the US, we may have days and weeks on end where we take a 10-minute break and eat our food at our desk really fast, and we're still working, right, in that frenzy. And there are cultures where that would be an absolute insult, and your lunch breaks could be 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And if it's a working lunch, it could last all afternoon. Whereas to an American culture, that seems very wasteful. How tied someone's personal identity is to their job or to their title is also an attitude towards work that is influenced by culture. And the concept of a calling, of something that you do because God ordained you or called you to do it. That's also something that is in some cultures and absent in others, obviously. Attitude towards ethics. So two concepts. Ethical relativism is the principle that ethics can vary with culture, or ethical universalism, that certain values are universal. And the UN has a Declaration of Human Rights where they list a certain number of cultural values that are universal or should be universal in the agreement that they've come in writing that document. There are differences in attitudes of personal ethics, moral standards versus business ethics or societal ethics. And in the US, we tend to view it more as a universal. My personal ethics and the business ethics should always match and go hand in hand. There shouldn't be differences. Whereas there are cultures where my personal standard and the business standard are very different, and I don't have a problem functioning in one or functioning in the other. Okay. So looking at the cultural values and how people weigh their ethical standards is very important in conducting business internationally. Then we have religious influences. So religious influences impact how we conduct business. So in the US believes in separation of church and state. They have never had an official state church. Business and religion don't really cross, should not cross, is our belief. No one is obligated to participate in religious holidays or ceremonies. And we keep that distance, okay? Countries where religion and state are very united will have a very different outlook. And when it comes to holidays, you celebrate, everybody celebrates those holidays. If there's honestly, there's a beauty to it. There's, having lived in and being surrounded by Islam, the rituals of Ramadan and all businesses closing down for prayer on Friday, there are some absolutely beautiful things in those cultures. So anyway, and then there's countries that have been almost atheistic, if not atheistic, in their nature, or their religion is very, very distant from their government, and so you hardly see any kind of overlap. Take a good look at individualism versus collectivism. This is something that I would suggest you take a look at again for your research paper. Individualism, so a belief that we are more standalone, versus collectivism, more family or group oriented. So individualism, we focus on the individual. Collectivism, we focus on the group or the family. Individualism, we're responsible for ourselves and our immediate family. Collectivism, we are responsible for the extended family. So those charts, that chart that I showed in the last chapter of how many people live in a household, countries that are collectivist have larger extended families living together than individualistic families, okay? So individualistic, we have management, mobility. In other words, we want to scale the jobs, and we jump from job to job, whereas collectivism, it's employee commitment, and you may be at the same level for life. Individualism, we keep private and work life separate. Pleasure is for individual achievement rather than group achievement. We speak our mind. We have right to privacy. Tasks prevail over relationship. And transgression of norms leads to guilt. So if I do something wrong within I may feel guilty about it and try to minimize or hide what I did. I being loosely. Collectivism, work and private lives are intermixed. You get pleasure from group achievement. Harmony should be maintained. The stress is on belonging. And relationships are a lot more important than tasks. It doesn't matter if it takes longer to do things as long as you preserve the relationship. And when you transgress norms, it leads to shame. And remember that I was talking about one of our friends openly lying. And I guess it was difficult because we come from that transgression leads to guilt. And for them, the entire family was lying for him, with him, so that the family would not be shamed. And once we caught on that that's what was going on, there was almost an acknowledgement that he had done wrong, but they were saving face. And once we caught on to that, we were able to let go of the situation and not continue to embarrass the family. So again, I hope these concepts are giving you an idea of what to start looking for in your research paper. Take the time to watch the presentation that Silas made on researching. And Wednesday, we will talk about that article. I will start giving you guys some framework ideas, and you can start working towards both the website content and your research paper. So we'll keep this up, and let me know if you have any questions that come up. Talk to you guys later. Have a good evening.